What is shimmying and shaking, everybody? It's Lack of Lepers, aka SCPCRNP, aka Script Nerp. Hope you're doing well. Good to see you, my one and only. Thanks for joining. Appreciate it very much. On this Tuesday night, where we do our reaction series, the only night of the week that we do this now, just because I'm a happier man for it. But thank you for coming. I appreciate that. Hopefully, that sort of consolidates our time together, makes it a little more scarce, and nice. So I hope you're doing well. Tonight, we are going to do something a little different. I've been wanting to do this for a while, and just today seems like the best time to do it. So usually on this show, we react to things, podcasts, media offerings, YouTube videos. Tonight, we're going to do something a little different. So recently, we had a contest for Confic Magazine, and this was the first independent platform contest for this sort of writing, which we call containment fiction. And so I'll put that up on the screen here. We had a great time with that. And today I thought it would be good. And people have been asking if I would do this. Not many people, but a couple. And so I said, yeah, why not? I felt like I'd do this. So tonight what we're going to do is we're actually going to go back and revisit INDIECON. And here it is on the website, by the way. And if anyone has seen these entries, then excellent. If not, this will be basically a typical review show, something like what we do on Friday nights for SCPs. But tonight, we will do this for the entries into the INDIECON 2022. So I figured this is a good night to do this. So what we'll do is we'll go through, we'll look at all the entries together. We'll sort of walk through them together. There are 8 entries. I'm very proud of these entries. I was very happy to see the sort of participation and output from this contest that we saw. So very, very happy to that. So before we get into things, I want to make sure you're doing okay. You doing good? Glad to hear that. It's easy to not be doing good. It's hard to be doing good. So I want to make sure that you're doing that. I am. So let's, before we get into anything else, in case you don't know what INDIECON is, I assume you do, but we don't like to assume. So INDIECON was a contest we had last month, and I'll just read the explanation here. INDIECON is the first writing contest featuring a platform-independent approach to containment fiction. Entrants can choose whatever format they wish, whether existing, for example, SCP or RPC, or in their own proprietary format. The authors of entries are not revealed until the end of the contest to help establish quality-centric voting. The winner is awarded $250 in prize money. The winner takes all. The contest theme was statues. So the challenge was to incorporate a statue somewhere in your work. There's a lot more flexibility than it sounds. It wasn't very strict. Your anomaly didn't have to be a statue. You could simply just have a statue show up somewhere in the entry at any point. However, marginal, it could be, and it would count. So, most people decided to play the statue a little closer to the table than to the chest in that regard. We got a lot of good statue work in here. And of course, the reason for the statue is because obviously it harkens back to SCP-173, and for the fact that on 4chan, the first few copycats of SCP-173, that is to say, other versions of SCPs and other attempts at containment fiction, they were all about statues. In fact, it took one person who was kind of ridiculed back in the day. It was a very bold move for someone to suggest that maybe we should be writing about something other than statues or figurines, or little figures, And so, there was a little bit of resistance to that idea, but it caught on pretty quick. One second. And oh boy, aren't we glad that it did. And so we've gotten so diverse. I thought it'd be an interesting thing to go back and try to live in those first sort of primordial moments of containment fiction and see what people could come back up with today when it came to statues. So that was why we did this. Of course, you see who the winner is already. And if you don't know, the winner is Salt Blossom, someone who's just incredibly talented at writing. I knew this person was talented at writing when they submitted an article to the Confic Wiki about Kalinin, which was excellent. And then I saw it again when this person wrote a magazine entry just about Lobotomy Corporation. And so I knew this person could write. And so I was very excited to see this person enter the contest just like I was everybody, really. And lo and behold, this individual won with entry 4. So we are going to go through each of the entries here. I've been blabbing enough with enough time. I know this is cattywampus here. I'm going to have to go back and fix that. I'm not the best at graphic design. Don't know if you noticed. This is probably the worst produced website ever, but I think it gets the job done. Shout out to Salt Blossom for helping me make this site, this webpage, look a little better than it was. You should have seen it before. So we're going to go through each of these entries. I'll talk about them. I kind of want to give the same treatment to these that I would an SCP week, right? So we're going to look at these. I'm going to give my honest opinion. So just a little caution to anybody who's watching this, who maybe entered into the contest. I'm not really going to hold back as I wouldn't for anything else, SCPs and whatnot. My job is to critique these things and not let the noise get in the way. So I've got to be quite honest about what I think about these, and so I will, and I'm intending to. So just a FYI on that. If you're watching this totally expecting praise, you might get it. You might get it. But then again, you might not. So just, I'm doing this once again to hopefully make you a better writer in some ways, just to point out where things went wrong, if they did. So we'll start with entry 1. Let me make sure you can see this. Yes, you can. We'll start with entry 1. Now, this one, once again, you didn't know any of the authors when they came out. Okay, these were redacted, and so we released these after the voting was completed. I thought that was a nice touch. Certainly something that I've had in mind for a long time, and I was very, very proud and happy. More than that, very, very happy to enact. So the entry 1 was written by Dr. Fern. Y'all know him as Fern. Dr. Fern Lom, a good friend of the SCF, and really, a very diplomatic person. He's in all kinds of Discord servers, SCP alike, and he hasn't been banned from SCP servers for simply being in the SCF. So he's quite the anomaly, quite the phenomenon, and we really, really, really appreciate Fern. Really, really great guy. I love talking to that guy, and has his heart and head in the right place. So let's talk about the entry. The entry is called The Storymaker's Tale number 854, and a subtitle of The Semi-Statue. So I had just a hard time sort of classifying this one. So if you look back in the entries, each one is classified based on whatever format they decided to take. For example, this one is indie. We've got a tale. We've got RPC entries in here. We have a Chaos Insurgency format. We could have had an SCP. Obviously, we are shunned from SCP, so no one wants to participate in that. That's fine. You do you. More than happy to have those pop up maybe in a later contest or not. It would be nice. But anyway, so this one was kind of hard for me to categorize. It kind of stated that it was a tale. For example, right here, tale begins. But it sort of felt like it was in some sort of format. And so I ended up categorizing it as indie. Although I really did think about making it a tale. So let's go through this one. So we get a title and begin the document with a date that has been redacted right here. Date taken from subject 001. All right, the first sentence of the preliminary remarks, just right here, is a little bit of a run-on sentence here, just to start things off with. It's a bit tangled and run-on-ish. For example, the author can take out either in this sentence, and as it just kind of trips the sentence flow up. So let's read this. Subject 001 has been an indispensable resource for the discovery and containment of abnormal beings that we otherwise would be either unable to track down and or pose an inexcusable cost to contain. So let's just take the word either out. And that way, abnormal beings that we otherwise would be unable to track down and or would pose an inexcusable cost to contain. So just a little bit of fluency in the sentence construction and the phraseology that could be polished up just a little, just to kick us off with in that first sentence. The rest of the intro, I think, is good. I really enjoy the use of High Watch right here as a designation for the sort of O5-like administration that this universe has. We get that reading through this, the subject 001 is a sapient entity who apparently tells stories about anomalies, and this is the primary sort of epistemological mechanism or mechanism of action or engine to this document, with this subject 001 sort of telling this containment organization about a new anomaly as it comes in. All right. So the second sentence of the interview intro is kind of a fragment. So we get our first one. Let's see. Yeah. So Dr. Lee Usti enters the subject 001's containment chamber, a modest living space with a single bed, a wooden desk, and a plush chair. So that should be maybe a comma, so that you wouldn't make that second sentence there just a phrase and not an actual complete sentence. That's not terrible, but the better move would be just to replace the period with a comma or a semicolon, and that way there's no actual error there at all. I feel like the character introduction to 001 is a bit too inorganic. His first line feels right here feels like it's trying too hard to establish his character, and we're dealing in sort of Holder's levels of dramatics right out of the gate. The same with the doctor, Dr. Usti, who is injecting a lot of world building very candidly. I feel as though the attempted levity in, for example, something like Dr. Usti is seen rolling his eyes. This elicits a chuckle. The attempted levity in that sort of moment, I think, doesn't land well. We haven't really built up enough of a relationship between these two to where something like that actually impacts the read. It seems sort of fabricated, sort of manufactured. As we get down a little bit, though, I do like how the description of this semi-statue, which is the main anomaly that the 001 subject talks about, I like how it's delivered with this good attention to detail and comfortably in the recollections of this 001. There were a couple of grammatical errors that I couldn't help but notice. There's right here, the subject starts the sentence without a capital T in the that. So just lacking appropriate capitalization there. And I think there's at least one other moment of this kind of thing. Yeah, just same here. So it's a little bit of a blocking note, but still it's not capitalized. So these things kind of stick out. The discovery story of the statue in here makes it seem sort of at odds with itself. It first tries to assault the story maker. So in the story maker has discovered the statue, and the statue first tries to assault this story maker character. And then as they start to discuss, it apparently is sort of waiting on him, waiting on this 001 person to show up, and has been waiting on him for a long time. So it seemed like there was a moment there where some action and tension was attempted, but that sort of unravels itself. But why is the semi-statue trying to attack this figure when he needs this figure and has been waiting on this figure for so long? We can assume some things that make that work, but it's all kind of behind the scenes, and it's not very clear on the surface of the actual tale of the actual article here. I also think that the anomaly itself seems a bit overwrought at times, in that it's given a large array of powers and abilities, so much so that they start to feel like they exist only so that the plot can progress. So, for example, the anomaly needs to be doing something here, so a criminal underworld is used, and so that the anomaly can suddenly do things that make him an asset to that underworld, like have a bunch of powers, shooting guns and things like this. So the list of anomalies' powers also is repeated way too often, such that it feels like the author is driving the point home a little too aggressively for the reader, sort of like bashing the anomaly's qualities over the head of the reader. So let me just, this is an example line. There's really a lot of these in here. Fascinating. I can see, this is the doctor speaking. Fascinating. I can see how a man with healing capabilities who can turn into stone would be useful for crime. It wasn't just his turning into stone. The mere presence brought life, healed people. Your pockets were filled. Your magazines were reloaded. And then let's give one more example, just to kind of point out. I'm trying to point out, get very granular with this. Answer my question. Do we now have to track down a man who can turn into a statue at will, armed with what is possibly a gun that he can reload endlessly, and who has healing capabilities? And then one more time here, just to kind of drive the point home. Let my official report note that capturing a man armed with a gun that can never run out of bullets, that can also turn into a rather heavy stone, is very difficult. So I understand that there's some sort of attempted, kind of humor right there in that particular last example, but we probably only need, that once. It shows up quite a lot, and it just feels very labored, like the author is not confident that the reader will be able to understand what the anomaly's qualities are. And so it comes off a little strong. on the part of the reader there. So there's a very good moment of dialogue here when the doctor suddenly calls him the 001 in the way that a parent would call maybe the full middle name of a child who's in trouble. So that was a cute little moment that I thought was in there. Yeah, right here. Subject 001, what do you mean? And then subject 001 is like, well, now, subject 001, am I in trouble now? You know, so he was calling him story maker before that. So I thought that was a fun little moment there. Shout out to a fellow dad. You know how that is. I haven't really gotten to the phase yet where I'm saying my kid's full name, but it probably need to be. She is getting, I'm telling you, man, once they hit 2, I mean, you heard about the terrible 2s, right? Oh my gosh. That shit is real, man. And the thing is, when they tell you about the terrible 2s, they make it seem like it's a temporary thing. It's not. It just, that's when it starts, and it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. So you really enjoy those those months before age 2 or so. Okay, damn. A couple months after 2, it really gets going. Feels like you're being shot out of a cannon, not in a good way. All right. So while I like the world building in this article, it strips a very pivotal, dynamic, and rich element out of other confic formats and worlds. In that this one, the anomaly, as I said before, is dictated almost in its entirety to the organizational personnel. For example, in this case, the story maker tells them exactly where to find this anomaly, and the organization merely has to send people out in order to confiscate this guy. One agent dies in the process, but there isn't a lot of ceremony to this in the actual document here. It's sort of dropped in the lap of the reader as if it was this hunk of chopped up bloody meat that wasn't really prepared to be appetizing in some ways, and so it was kind of just like there. And so, it's like, I'll be reaching out to the family of Agent Hustle myself to sadly inform them of his passing. Obviously, that's realistic, and I appreciate that inclusion, but it just feels like we need to have been introduced to the agent maybe a little bit, just to build up some characters so that we can be a little sad by the fact that this person died. So I felt like that was kind of a missed opportunity here. We also have what I call just a number literary decision here, which is again a pretty common complaint that I have about humanoid anomalies that I think is very easy to do, where the humanoid anomaly is talking to a research doctor, and the doctor is calling them by their numerical designation, and you do this and you just strip me down to a number. That's kind of like, I mean, it's a pretty tired thing to see in this sort of situation. So I just wanted to point that out, because that would be a moment where you need to maybe build in some second order thinking and say, okay, how can I vary that up a little bit? Because it's something that we see a lot of, a lot of the times on SCP. You'd be surprised how often that comes out on SCP, for example. But you have to be aware as an author that average confic articles featuring humanoid anomalies will almost always have a line in there like this. So anytime you can sort of be aware of those things so that you can avoid doing the same thing that all those other articles are doing, that's a good thing. So that's why I want to point that out. We get to an interview with the actual anomaly. This actual anomaly is subject 854. And so we get some good world building here. I especially like the idea of an anomalous genetic mutation bomb that converts people into anomalies. It does kind of have a little like Marvel Spider Bite X-Men kind of tone to it, but I think it's sufficiently creative of an idea to stand apart. I think that was a really, really cool little moment in there that I came across. Some questionable grammar and sentence flow down here as well. My friends were always the more morally, lawfully good aligned. Me, not so much. I just think there's probably one too many adjectives in that right there. We get a few more attributes pasted onto this anomaly, like a song that plays when the statue is in statue mode. So I would always caution against your characters making statements of assessment with regards to, how scary or how informative, or in this case, how fascinating what just came in the document is. The preceding prose is. So let that come through the writing itself. Don't have your characters tell us, the reader, that what we just read was fascinating. The prose itself should be doing that work to where we say it's fascinating, not the not the doctor, although that's obviously something you could put in there, but it's be careful, because you don't want to be dictating how the reader is supposed to be feeling. It's almost like an applause sign, lights up in one of those live studio audiences. I like that the story here inserts a springboard and insertion point for more world building. So, for example, these wraiths that are mentioned towards the end, they really sort of are suggested. They're not shown, and they really, really are compelling additions to this article. And it almost feels like this is a very, very natural direction for the author to go in if they're going to write a next one of these articles in this kind of world, because they seem to be kind of canonically pivotal in what's happening here. I also like the ominous ending of this, which suspends some pretty interesting questions and implications at the very end. For example, what this means concerning the multiverse is unknown. So I won't ruin that all for you, but you should definitely go into that. It's a very interesting way. I think the article really, really gets very, very interesting in the last minute or two of the read. I think it's a little too little, a little too late, but it really has some moments where it shines that I really, really enjoy. So ultimately, I think the article's strengths here are its emotional involvement with the anomalies, a more humanitarian and collaborative posture to the anomalies, such as the story maker. There's very interesting world building going on in here, and a very healthy creativity behind it. I think the cobbled and unspecific nature of the central anomaly is a weakness that makes this anomaly seem capable of anything that is convenient for the story and the plot to progress. So the story maker was a nice way to introduce a description and a discovery section, this being sort of orated to us from this character. That was a nice little way to put, because there's no actual designation for the discovery or for the description, but that all came to us through the story maker's storytelling. So I thought that was a nice little touch, and was a really interesting way to mesh sort of the config format with the tale kind of setup and delivery. But it also at the same time felt as though it was just, there's a lot there just for plot convenience, that storytelling included. And the character doesn't really come back to do anything else. The story maker character doesn't really come back to do anything else after he does what he needs to do for the plot. And so it seems as though it's basically there just as a useful expository conduit. So all in all, I think this is a work that is an interesting take that I really appreciate, that actually it had some very, very novel and interesting mixes and mixtures of containment fiction elements and tales. But I do think it needs probably a little more attention and a little more refinement to have ultimately been competitive in the contest. But I really, really do enjoy this. I thought this was a nice little pilot episode to something that could be developed in a lot of very interesting directions. So good job for those things to the author. Okay, so moving right along, entry 2. This is Project Mystic. It is an indie format. It is by Dr. Pearson, and the format, this first one we saw was a .pdf, and this one is a .rar, .rar, which is like a zipped folder. So I think it was certainly the most creative format of the contest, kind of like our resident format screw, if you will. The initial version that was submitted even had videos, like MP4s, like of interviews of a person. So I was initially very, very out there, very cool. I was initially trying to make this whole INDIECON contest as stripped down as possible, with as little bells and whistles, just getting back down to brass tacks, so as to focus most on the writing itself. But this entry nearly single-handedly forced me to recant that. Having a nebulous, unzippable config entry was just too compelling to me. So definitely points for sure to this entry for immediately pushing that boundary in a good direction. I think I don't regret the decision to sort of loosen up. Initially, every entry was going to be into Pastebin. So you went to Pastebin to pull it up, but this kind of threw that for a loop, and I'm glad it did. It ended up being, it was too strict. So this certainly did the right thing for me. So let me kind of get my setup right, because we're going to have to switch real quick from that to this. This is the .rar. When you download it, this is what it looks like. And so we have Mystic. There's a folder here as well. So structurally, as you can see, perhaps this entry is very complex. There's a base file Mystic that is split up into 3 subfolders: a date right here. We have Delta incident right there, and something called Project Forays. There's also a loose document hanging out, a memo from the Department of Defense. So one of the most pronounced effects and I think achievements of this open world style is just that, this kind of paradigm potential shift from something like the linear video games of old to the point where now we're in the age of open world video games where linearity is sort of a pejorative, right? A game can be sort of bashed for being too linear. And so, this is sort of like that, that opening in config where you have this giant RAR file, and other pieces have done this, like SCP 6500 has done this, and to a lesser extent, SCP 59999. And I think we have another one showing up in the 7K that kind of does this, where it's like a tabletop game. Don't quote me on that. I haven't gotten to it yet. I just sort of saw that it was posted. So yeah, this is kind of along the lines of that. Just really, opening up the directionality that any reader could walk through your article in. There's been things like that before. The Choose Your Own Adventures on the SCP Wiki, for example, kind of were that too. But never have I seen a .rar. Obviously, there's no place for it besides, let's say, this contest. So, when you get in here, the reader has the option to really go whichever way they want. And probably will still get the gist. So certainly I can't do the usual walkthrough like I do with the rest of these entries. But having said that, the author of this was very, very clever, because what they did was put some password protections on these entries. So let's just, for example, if we go to this, it says protected. You open it up, and let me see if I can show you this. You open it up, and basically it asks you for a password, And so I really thought this was so cool, because it's an actual credential check, right? It's an actual credential check. And so the author really can kind of play around with that, because by giving you passwords, obviously, in certain documents, they can sort of still, in this open world, guide the architecture and the directionality of the reader, to go to this place first, kind of like a video game would be. So, but let's open this. This is kind of, like I said, just the one kind of hanging out in the actual loose documentation. I wish there was an easier way for me to switch screens without popping my big old mug up on the screen for you. So this is, just, I love the aesthetics. This is kind of just a sample of what most of these pages look like. I love the aesthetics of this entry. It plays so true to real life intelligence drops and hand pin sort of redactions. It gives such a feel of authenticity to me that I've always been such a fan of, but that, interestingly enough, isn't really that common in containment fiction. I guess people feel a little too much like LARPers when they try this, but a Department of Defense memo is a good example of this. So I think this is just wonderfully placed, and it just nails it. I love it as opposed to digital redactions, which is what we get typically in containment fiction, because as opposed to digital redactions, when it comes to this sort of analog redaction style like this, there's something underneath there, right? I mean, it's not a question of, did the author have anything in mind when they redacted this? That doesn't occur here. That there's something there. So, in addition, I think the placement of the individual redactions, I think, is well done. Very effective places to do that. We have such immersion here as to feature, like I said, those passwords. So, it's a little more satisfying than actually putting in access credentials, and just clicking them to unlock them. So I thought that was a really cool. There's nothing that's more satisfying than actually putting in that correct passcode and unlocking the page, as opposed to just clicking a collapsible JavaScript. So eat your heart out, Wikidot. I think this has definitely got you beat on that end. So once again, I'm not going to go through the whole thing on this. You definitely should check this out. This is a really interesting, entry, particularly aesthetically. and structurally. But let's just take an actual look real quick at the actual anomaly. So this is sort of the the database file where it somewhat has a format going for it. We have a genome sequence, a classification number, hazard procedures, appearance and nature. So it definitely Appendix A. It's definitely still abiding by a containment fiction format on the face of this. So what the anomaly here is a statue, and it sort of modifies its position when eye contact is broken in direct homage to SCP-173. But it does have its differences, like making eye contact with personnel in the room, which is kind of creepy, and proliferating a fungus that can cause severe medical distress. The anomaly mostly dodges, and the author in writing this anomaly mostly dodges cliches, but this anomaly does get an anger stage and also phases of infection that happen, stages of the infection. These are sort of very classical Series 1 sort of inclusions that are commonly regarded as cliches just in the containment fiction world. So it does do that. I think it weighs down the read and the anomaly just a little bit, but it's not egregious. Additionally, the document proper goes on to detail a containment breach that implies with too little show and too little tell that this thing is dangerous. And so, this is a very, very Series 1 style article in that containment fiction trends and ideas and directions and decisions. I think the clinical tone of this whole work is acceptable. It's not the most fluent when it comes to sentence construction and syntactical flair and phraseology, but it's perfectly fine. We get some interesting artistic inclusions in the Delta incident that I won't pull up here, but that I think don't do the article very, very much. The sketches that we see are sort of edgy, sort of edgelordish, and kind of come off as sort of just like margin doodles, sort of a Hollywood scary, when you see a kid doing a doodle in a Hollywood movie. But otherwise, this folder here, the Delta incident, serves as the addenda with correspondence letters. But yeah, so we go on to establish some ulterior and corruption-born purposes for containing this anomaly, sort of like the equivalent of the O5, becoming a little more possessive of an anomaly, realizing that they can use it to benefit themselves, perhaps in a monetary fashion. So, after getting through all this material here, I'd say that behind the intriguing presentation, it's not just intriguing, it's mesmerizing. Behind the mesmerizing presentation of this is a relatively thin anomaly that produces something of value, but it's difficult to contain. We see a lot of conflict like that. The most prominent successful example is probably SCP-3000. But the narrative here, whether it's spaced out too much across this open world presentation or not, it feels like it doesn't really move on much from that initial idea. It does have some dark shading going on with the using it sort of in a manufacturing process for these higher ups and putting people at risk in doing so. But once again, that's sort of a flavor that we taste all the time. Certainly on the SCP Wiki. So all in all, I think it's an incredibly engaging, impressive visual presentation with a lot of innovations. But not a whole lot else on the plate. While it's nice that we have such a deeper sense of immersion, I think, in this entry out of all of them, that's nice. But, when it comes to the actual brass tacks, when it comes down to the actual writing, it seems the effort was sort of diluted to accommodate some of that visual tour. But again, I love what this entry did for the contest. I really appreciated it. It's hard to appreciate this entry without that somewhat of that backstory I told you at the beginning, enabling the other formats that ended up showing. And so I do really appreciate this entry. It's not my favorite writing wise, but certainly the most, I think, exciting and avant-garde of the entries. So I really, really appreciated that. So thank you very much to that author, by the way, and thank you for not listening to my instructions. Because your ideas were better than mine. Okay, so this is entry 3. There is no title to this. It was not submitted with a title. And it is by author Soraya Stuff, who we know is primarily active in the back rooms, a well-known writer for that, and also did some work for us on the Confic magazine, which was just excellent, just absolutely excellent stuff. I can't remember how old this person is. Very young person, certainly writing above their age. They are writing, really schools and schools ahead of their own age. A very very talented, very very advanced thinker, Soraya Stuff. So I actually didn't know who wrote this. So we made the whole contest blinded, but I typically knew who submitted what, except for this one. This one was submitted through the email, and there was no indication of who it was from. And I emailed back to say, hey, did you want to put a title? There was no answer. And so I didn't know who wrote this until the contest was over, and I was revealing the names, and someone was like, hey, that's me. And I said, oh, okay. And so it was Soraya Stuff. So it was quite a pleasant surprise for me too. I got to participate and experience the unveiling as well. So that was nice. So as you can see, this is a tale. It's relatively short. This is not a commitmental read. It's just maybe a page, maybe 2.5 pages. Some of it's very spaced in this section down here. So I think just reading through the whole thing, just some general things I can say. I think if I could give some pointers to the writing, it would be that there's probably too many adjectives in this. Taking out some of these adjectives like indistinguishable, or abandoned, as we see later. Let's see if I can find that so I can abandoned. Yeah. So it just seems like there's always an adjective that maybe doesn't need to be there. And adjectives are great because they describe more. But if you can get away from using an adjective, you should, because it really, really convolutes the sentence. And you would be surprised how much more smooth sentences will read if you try to take out as many adjectives as you can. And so what should guide you about when to take out an adjective is if it's already implied. So, by this point in the read, when we see abandoned, these abandoned abodes, we've already sort of been told that these things are sort of ruins, and so we understand that they're abandoned. So we actually don't need that word in there. And the same really is true for indistinguishable, more than just remains of another epoch. So let's read this sentence one way, and then we'll take out the adjectives, and then we'll see just how much better I think it flows. So here it is as is. They would not know, however, that these abandoned abodes were ever more than just indistinguishable remains of another epoch. Okay, so now let's take out the adjectives. They would not know, however, that these abodes were ever more than just remains of another epoch. There's a certain lilt, there's a certain cadence, there's a certain mellifluousness or a melody that is within that second take where we take out those adjectives. And so when it comes to the musicality of your composition and your sentence construction and your writing, anything that doesn't need to be there should be taken out because it does get in the way. It sort of just bottlenecks the musicality of your writing. So that's just a very split hair fine point to mention here, because I think this is really, really well written, this whole tale. And I'm being picky because it's well written. This is a really, really well written tale. There's great characterization in this. The setting is evocative. The imagery is clear. The descriptive prose is really, really good. So let's point out a few moments of note that were really, really good. So the people who lived in this city benefited from its prosperity. Every citizen possessed material wealth, access to the finest wines of the lands, and they were all educated far above the times standard. They used their power and influence to spread far and wide across the droughty expanse, conquering the lesser kingdoms and pulling them apart brick by brick. That's a fucking good sentence or two. That is good writing. I mean, just so much is packed in there, and it's all so informative, but it's almost effortlessly informative because it's as evocative image-wise as it is instructive. I love this line. There's a line here: homes become houses as the beings that lived in them faded away. Damn. That is really, really good. I fucking love that. So subtle, so good. There's a moment or two where the precision of the prose stumbles, the attempt becoming a little too exaggerated and carried away with itself. For example, in the sentence here, walking through the city today is much akin to walking through a graveyard of shattered dreams. That's a little corny of an analogy, if you ask me. So there's another one over here. On its last legs, both physically and metaphorically, the oolite it is made of has been gradually weathered by the sands of time. That probably should not be there. It should be sort of unspoken that it's both physical and metaphorical. That comes off as too sort of force-fed of an observation for the reader. The reader maybe should be left to make that observation by themselves. It's one of, I think, the ways actually to add three-dimensionality and depth to a piece of prose is to sort of make those things suggested. They actually come through a lot stronger that way, because when it comes this way, it's just a little too loud in the mix, and just works a little better if it's panned out to the distance just a little bit. So the tale itself has themes of conquest, cultural dominance, the woes of imperialism, the fate of the hubris, the inadequacy of short horizon goals and spoils, like short-term stuff, myopic ambitions, the inevitability of decline and death, and the omnipotence of time. Given sufficient time, time always wins. So there's a certain instructive and almost biblical tone of this entry that gives it a depth and an intrigue to the contest. It's the only tale in the contest as well, so helping it stand out in more ways than just being a tale. Like I said, there's a certain gravity about this tale that just it's so aphoristically packed with world building and lore and backstory and suggestion. So it really stood out to me in that way. It's a very entertaining and rich read. I think it plays with the theme very, very well. I really enjoy how the subtlety and the grace with which this entry treats the contest theme, which is essentially the statue of Ozymandias. So yeah, it's a short little tale. Really, really liked it. An excellent representation of sort of more traditional, more purple, more liberated writing for this space, and just a really great read. Amazing that all that was achieved in about a 2-page. Okay, so the next one we're actually going to skip because we're going to save this one for last. So we'll move on to entry 5 here and see what we can see. This one is called See You Later, Alligator, and it's by Pixelated Harmony. And the format is indie. This is actually an AOEL article. AOEL is I don't know if I'll be able to get this on a Google hit. We're so freaking obscure. AOEL database? Probably not. Oh, there it is. Wow, I'm surprised it popped up. This was a little wiki dot created initially by Furret, who is, pour one out for Furret. We certainly tip our hat to Furret. Hope he's doing well. Excellent writer, and a friend, I think I would say, honestly. Maybe that's unrequited, but that's okay. But anyway, so yeah, lots of small entries here. Not many of them, but these certainly sort of have their own style to them. Harmony put some stuff in here too that I think was once on RPC. So you can go check that out there. But so this is in the AOEL format, and the AOEL stands for Anomalous Object, Entity, or Location. Oh, excuse me. So I love the AOEL format. Like I said, it started by Furret. It has some great little entries in there. I don't think it'll ever be a full project. Furret essentially gave it away to us when Furret decided to leave. And so it's kind of been stagnated. We hope to sort of add some things to it as people take their stuff down from other sites. We thought that might be a nice, housing just to offer homeless pieces of config that have for whatever unfortunate reason been unable to stay on their initial home. And if they can't go back to their initial home, which I think I would prefer, maybe this is a good place to put them. But I really did enjoy writing for the AOEL database for a small time with Furret, and we still have, like I said, a few others in there besides ours, and maybe a few more coming in. So that would be cool. All right, so on to the article after I've gushed about that for a second. So we have a very competent and polished tone in this article. We know who wrote this, right? So it's not a concern for Harmony, who has really become so good at clinical tone after a decade of writing that she just is somewhat post-clinical tone now. But it is so cool to always see just how fluent she is in clinical tone. She does a very good job of that. So this is an anomaly. It designates an ambulatory piece of statuary in the shape of an American alligator. Its composition is primarily of concrete, with an apparent rebar skeleton providing support throughout its body. So that's kind of the image. We have a nice picture here that kind of shows that too. The conprocs are sufficiently tailored to the anomaly as to generate specificity and intrigue. I think the anomaly is serviceable, and I appreciate the callback to SCP-173 with the rebar put in there too. I think the image complements the description quite nicely as well, and I think it may have even been written from this image. I don't know. I kind of want to believe that just because it kind of has some Series 1 sort of tones to it in the best of ways. So speaking of good clinical tone, and knowing how to bend clinical tone so that it doesn't break, this is a really great moment. So this sentence says, behaviorally, it is similar to non-concrete alligators. I mean, that's a great line. It's a believable line that doesn't strain the suspension of disbelief too much, but just made me lol when I read that. Just a great little flair. It's something believable that the in-universe documenters would be like, okay, so it has similar attributes to not other alligators that are not made of concrete. The ones that you and I know. So this is something that, for example, modern SCP authors are not very good at doing. They don't know how to add these like questionable seconds of clinical tone. They really, on the whole, I think, don't do that very well. So this is a nice little subtle flair and flourish to see done. We see something like this later again, by the way, with the hilarious but strictly clinical image of a stone alligator flying through a camp in the midst of a hurricane. So I do think we could do away with the second concrete in this sentence. So behaviorally, it's similar to non-concrete alligators. However, due to its concrete composition, we could probably get rid of that second concrete and be just fine. It's understood, so it feels a little redundant when it shows up that second time. The author does a great job, I think, playing with the solid implications of the ingredients, asking what would happen if a concrete alligator got into water or was on a soft surface like some loose sand. And in order to draw contrast to non-concrete alligators as well while we're at it. So the low-key oddity of this continues when the alligator hunts things, but it can't really do anything besides mangle its prey. It doesn't have any organs. It's literally just a concrete statue. So it kind of tries to eat it, but it just ends up chewing it. But it's happy enough with itself, as if it got fed. So I thought that was nice direction to take this in. The article does take also a nice environmentalist sort of approach in the third paragraph of the description here. Over time, the anomaly has been damaged, usually as a result of interacting with humans. And so that sort of kickstarts a whole sort of human versus environment sort of tension that we get throughout the rest of this article. And it goes down and details each of these incidents that it was injured during. And a lot of these are during construction attempts, some of which were really an affluence of waste and were tossed out and never realized. Other instances of poor husbandry on the land resulting in wildfires, for example, the influx of downstream pollutants, even hunting misfires that have damaged this thing. So there's a lot of powerful metaphors and statements made in this. Also a very daring direction to go in that the author is not really afraid of just making these things very bold on the surface, but also doesn't really come off too harsh and too sort of preachy as these sorts of topics can get in the hands of, I think, lesser skilled authors. So There's even a knot of irony, I think, in here that proposals to install an on-site repair facility for this anomaly specifically is itself deemed environmentally unfavorable. So, yeah, I like how the article incorporates these elements. It folds them in very graciously. It doesn't overplay those things. It incorporates the COVID pandemic really in the last context here, the last little entry here. So it does that too. It ends on that note. COVID was sadly the last note in many stories, and it certainly was for this anomaly too. So just a very blatant emotional insertion point that I think hits most people and certainly did me too. So all in all, I think this entry was a very charming, a very sophisticated piece of containment fiction. It doesn't really have the bombast and the writing for the charts sort of commercialism that has dominated places like the SCP, but it has a great amount of depth and commentary, as well as, I think, expert handling and treatment of the anomaly given its circumstances. So I think this article was definitely underappreciated in the voting. And obviously, that doesn't say everything, but I think this one probably was underappreciated, just if I had to say that. So I think it was better than what it got votes. It was really good. There's a couple articles like that. I'll mention the other one too. All right. Excuse me. So the next one is Oblivion of Glories Past. This is an entry by the great Tarbalin69, great author, active at the RPC. And then this one is, the format is RPC as well. So the file, we just decided to put it on Wikidot. So if you go here, you'll get to the sandbox of the magazine on RPC, I guess. This is an INDIECON exhibit entry on the RPC sandbox so that we can bring this to you in that format, okay? So let's get into this one. So the header here, this is the classic RPC header that tells us this is an alpha red, which means that it is contained with minimal difficulty. That's what the alpha part is. But the red part means that it's actively lethal, making direct interaction or contact with this anomaly dangerous. So the threat tells us also to the side these little hazards that give a little more detail as to what this anomaly is. Tells us that this has to do with radiation hazards, destabilization hazards, and emotional hazards as well. So the protocols here, I think, are adequate. They involve a multi-center operation that hints that the anomaly is an artistic product that gives off Groves radiation, and then Groves radiation is a type of radiation generated by both interdimensional interactions and by thaumaturgy in the RPC. We get this idea too that this can spawn hostile entities of some kind, or participate in some sort of hostility that we'll get to. I feel as though the protocols have a lot more text than actual information, so there's just, I think, a lot of bloat in there. It could probably do with a slight haircut, not much because it's not long, but I think some of it just felt like just sort of meandering, just a little bit. Okay. The article casts an intriguing sculpture as the anomaly, made by an artist involved with an RPC group of interest, whose goal it is to propagate low threat level anomalous artworks. And so this is the Academia della Vera Arte. I know I said that incorrectly. It's sort of like the RPC's equivalent to Are We Cool Yet? It has a little different of a spin to it if you don't know. But anyway, this person is from this GOI. So the anomaly, I think, is compelling and makes me want to read more. It certainly has a lot of potential for good storytelling, and the author doesn't disappoint when it comes to that. Its effect is likewise imaginative and rich with possible directions. I like this null value area effect that shows up that my search is not capturing. Null value, that's what it is. Yeah, null value zone. At this point, the anomaly will create a null value zone around it. A null value zone is best described as a region of space in which complex actions of any kind become unattainable by anomalous alteration of the affected area. I just think that's a nice idea. That's really cool to see, and I think it's given a great name here too. So the effect almost comes off in a utility, or kind of like SCP's Thaumiel as it can put these other anomalies in a sort of stasis, and often does when an anomaly or another offending body, as this article states, are within a range of proximity. It seems like some sort of defensive system where it expels increasing amounts of radiation to ward off these perceived threats that it has. I like this nice touch of these faux links to other documentation here at the base of this description div. I'm relieved to find out that they aren't substantiated by a bunch of actual texts, I gotta say. But I thought this was really cool. It gives you the title. You can count yourself informed. It looks like a link. It's designed to look like a link. Kind of fakes you out. But I thought that was a pretty cool little moment there. So typical of the author's strengths, we get excellent characterization and situational backstory for this sculptor. The author weaves this in with some intrigue and some mystery back into the anomaly and its discovery, demonstrating how fatal it can get, but not necessarily why. The article concludes with a very emotive cadence. The poem at the end, I think, is really good. There's an original that's in Spanish that I can't read. There's a translated one that is great. So the poem, I think, at the end is just a very, very good poem. And while having a bit of note at the end syndrome in the way of exposition and answering the questions of the article, things are still vague enough by the end to put the authority and the reader at a less than complete understanding, which I think is an excellent study in maneuvering through the supplied data on the part of the author. Another way to say that is just really, really good architecture. If you imagine an architect keeping in mind and designing how it's going to be, how the flow of a person walking through the building is going to have to be based on where the architect makes decisions structurally. That's kind of what this is in writing, where the author leads the reader, to this place, and then you see this, then you see this, and then it opens up in this big space, whatever. So the author does a really, really good job of that. And part of it is knowing when to drop what information. So good job. I think the article's strength is its complexity of the anomaly's design while making it seem very simple, and the author handling that complexity very well. The clinical tone is excellent, the characterization, the careful world building that doesn't get a little too overwrought or too involved with itself, and combining all of these to deliver a pretty emotional impact by the end. So this is a very good article. The author has a ton of talent with this genre. I was not surprised that this was as good coming from this author as it was. If there are some shortcomings, I think it's the pacing, which suffers just a bit from that bloat and bogs down the aerodynamics of the read, such as in the protocols. But even then, that's only really the beginning, and the pacing is really exceptional after that, particularly in the discovery. I think the discovery is where this thing just moves into a new gear and really revs the entire article. So this is easily an above average containment fiction article. If I was reading this article and doing the SCP show where we put this into categories, this would be, I think, either a ray of hope or raising the bar, weightlifting the whole wiki. This is above the average quality of SCPs by far. It's not even close. So I was very, very happy to see representation from the RPC authors, and just a chance to show, hopefully, people that this myth that the RPC is too bigoted to write well, or doesn't have any good writing in it. Say what you want to about the political nature of the place. It has excellent writing in it. There's some really, really, really good works in the RPC. My works are on the RPC. I'm happy to have them there. I think those are pretty good too. Just FYI, of course, I toot my own horn, and we all like to be our own critic. All right, so moving on, we have our entry number 7. This is called Galatia Incident. It is by author Zesk, who we know in the SCF, of course, and who is part of the Chaos Insurgency. So I don't know if you know this, but the Chaos Insurgency, some people don't know this. Chaos Insurgency Wiki dot. It has its own wiki, okay? Has its own wiki. And it's still active. So if you go to new pages, This might not seem impressive to you, but this is about the pace of, let's say, SCP Commune. I think it's probably more bumping than SCP Commune. And it's about the pace of RPC these days, honestly, too. So don't count it out. It's, if you haven't checked it out, go check it out. But they have their own format, and then this article is in its own format, in the Chaos Insurgency format. And the author was very creative in this one. I was given the HTML code for this article. That was it. So I thought that was pretty cool. So when we put this together, we had to give it its own page on the on the website, and I think it came out okay. I would have liked for it to be, let's say, a little wider, but that's okay. One second. Oh, excuse me. I had to cough. I'm not crying because the article name is so beautiful. The Galatia incident. And really that continues. The Paradolian man is really what the first title that we say. Before we get into that, though, let me get a couple sips here. Goodness gracious, excuse me. Excusez-moi. Man, I'm just falling apart here. Okay. Such a beautiful name. Just can't get over it. Such a beautiful name. All right, so first off, as I said, this is a very creative submission type with an HTML, which is essentially a web page and has more potential for customization and visual delivery than something like Wikidot can possibly have. I just wanted to throw that out there for anybody listening. But like I said, the format is the Chaos Insurgency Wiki. So this is an article made up of multiple anomalous statues. We don't get one. We don't get two. I think we get like 3 or 4. The first one is the Paridolian. I can't say this word. Paridolian man. Okay. And then it goes on to another one called the Model of Chivalry, and so on and so forth. So we start off with the documentation of the Paridolian man. Pareidolia is the tendency for let's see, perception to impose a meaningful interpretation upon something. So let's see. Pareidolia definition. The tendency to perceive a specific, often meaningful image in a random or ambiguous visual pattern. So this is what happens when you look up at the sky and you see clouds that look like things, or you see human faces in everyday objects. Like this right here, which, by the way, the internet was obsessed with. I don't know if anyone is old enough to know this, but on the internet, just around the time of all the lolcats and the oh really owls, there was a huge thing about human faces in images. That was just something big. Now that people could share images with one another on the internet, that kind of became a big thing for a while there in the early internet. That was a fun time. Anyways, so there's a little bit of a meaningful interpretation here. So that's a cool thing to see. The anomaly itself is a statue made of marble that has a passive cognitohazard and has sort of spontaneous duplication effects as well. So we have a usage section. The sort of entry table tells us a little bit about the anomaly in the same way that the headers and the ACS and things like this do for other containment fiction formats. We get to usage, which is essentially the conprox, and the report, which is essentially the description. Okay. The usage gives us some terminology regarding the anomaly. The term dupes is used. I think it's probably not the best name for what we could have used, but it's all good. The name dupes is kind of like people who are convinced by the cognitohazard of this anomaly. Okay, so that's what dupes are. It touches on some interesting implications and possibilities already with the ingredients, such as covert long-distance communication between these dupes. Okay, so once you kind of get hive-minded into this anomalous cognitohazardous effect, you can sort of talk to one another. So The Chaos Insurgency is interested in pursuing this in a research manner if it's proven to be the case. They're looking into that. The report section, as I said, stands for the description. We get a nice description of something you might see in the SCP-173 reimagining artworks. Just some interesting imagery going on there. I think occasionally we have some clunky sentences, such as the last one in the report's second paragraph. So when multiple instances are simultaneously present, dupes will only interact with one of them, but the instance may change during their interaction, coinciding with actions that might imply the person having moved to the position of another instance. Just quite a mouthful to say. I think we hopefully could have broken that up in a few sentences and that flow been just a little better. And once again, back to the dupes. Maybe it's the SCP and RPC in me, but I think a -1 or something of that sort would have been a less awkward choice there. Reading things like where is it? Second degree dupes. It comes out, almost makes me want to just laugh out loud, like it's an unintentional insult for somebody. You're a second degree dupe. I mean, it just sounds like a good insult. I'm gonna have to write that one down for somebody. So they're like, what? I love the careful intellectual play that goes on in this article. This one right here. It makes it very likely that the Paradolian man is indeed a statue that appears to be a man to acquaintances and not a man that appears as a statue to strangers. So this is really, it kind of reminds me of the first entry in this, that the story maker's tale, but it sort of adds this like new dimensionality of puzzle, of cleverness that goes on with that. So I really appreciated that entry. So just a lot of good intellectual play that I thought was cool. The Paradolian man is indeed a statue that appears to be a man to acquaintances as we get to the rest of the document, I think. But I just love the nuance there. So the logic of the article does some interesting acrobatics here, really at the end of the surveillance report right here. It sort of deals in a strange logic that plays with the perceptions of reality, which is, of course, sort of hearkening back to the title, The Paradolian Man, in a lot of ways, and mixes almost a religious and immaculate conception sort of note in the characters of this article. It's eclectic in its inclusion of its ingredients, including a nod to, let's say, Gamers Against Weed. That hyperlink actually going to the SCP commune. I don't know. Yeah, there it is right there. So that actually goes to the SCP commune as a link. Interesting. These are I guess members of the Gamers Against Weed, so that's cool. And so the next section is the next anomaly. Like I said, we have separate anomalies here, all of which are statues in their own ways. So this is another separate anomaly. It's known to be sentient and can move around on its own. It's a horse statue with a figure riding it and one who is armed with a lance. So the Chaos Insurgency uses this in commando functions, and the figure, I think, is given a very interesting character as you read this. So that didn't have to happen. I thought the author did a great job with the detail of this character and sort of letting us know the personality of what this statue is like. There's a little bit of typos, just typos here and there. This ideology is deemed to by highly compatible with employment by the insurgency. That's obviously supposed to be a B instead of a by. So we go down a little bit. We're back at the Paradolian man in the next addendum. We can see the author is sort of weaving these things together. It almost reminds me of one of those TV shows where it's got like multiple stories going on, and as the episode progresses, you understand that they're all sort of coming together into a confluence moment. And so that's kind of what's happening here at the start of it, at least. So we're back at the Paradolian man in the next addendum, which describes an incident that happens, and then we're out just as quick. The next one, the writer anomaly attempts to send messages, and this introduces some strange happenings before we get into our third anomalous statue in the text. In my opinion, probably the most interesting one, which is called Morsifier, which is a great name. Holy crap. This author does a fantastic job at naming things. The Paradolian man, Morsifer. There's other stuff in here too, but this one I think is my favorite. Really, really great naming. So Morsifier is the one who interacted with this statue anomaly in the previous log, as it was trying to relay a communication. The containment of this section feels particularly convoluted. It has a lot of technobabble that makes it kind of difficult to read. However, the description of the statue is very engaging, a very creative way to have a data monitoring system. It's like it could be its own SCP. I mean, the amount of creative imagination that went into designing this anomaly here, the Morsifier, I think is outstanding. It's astronomical, very, very impressive scale, and yeah, wow, very, very good job. So the technobabble, it takes a while to get through, but it's totally worth it to read the rest of, particularly the description of this thing. I love the use of painkillers to enact a exploration log. So you have to know a little bit about this anomaly here. It sort of sends out this area effect of pain, unbearable pain. And so in order to have agents approach it and interact with it, they have to take a lot of painkillers. I thought that was just incredibly creative of a way to sort of allow that, interaction to take place. You don't see that every day. In fact, I've never seen that in any containment fiction before, where the protocols include taking painkillers to get to the anomaly. Even the entity's sort of philosophical musings, which are down here. I am a temple of suffering, a celebration of pain, delect in the torment I have to author. Even this, I think, is pretty well done, all in all. So just an interesting character here too. There's some really, really, really great lines in here. Excellently constructed sentences. As a sapient but inanimate entity, Morsifier is immune to mimetic or cognito-hazardous kill agents. Historical data has shown that exposure to some of these results in immense trauma for entities that cannot escape them through death. So just a really, really compelling sentence. There are a couple other instances, though, in the sentence construction that I think have some trip-ups in them. So, for example, this one, after further investigation, this correlation is likely caused by causation. That's kind of bumbles over itself with the causation being listed twice. You probably could say something like, after further investigation, this is causation, not correlation, and that probably would have been fine. But little things I'm getting into here. The action log here also feels a little technical. This update on the status of the Grapevine network. It feels like this is really meant for coders by coders or network administrators. To these people, this would be a really kick-ass action sequence, I'm sure. But to a layman like myself, it's just a lot to get through. It feels like I'm reading a textbook, and I don't really understand most of this. So there's a little bit of a disconnect when it comes to the hand holding the reader through this part of the article. We get more information about this Galatia event. It's really the first time I think that we've seen this really gone into a lot of detail. Another great name, by the way. And I just love the creativity employed to further situate sort of the contest theme, which of course is statues. So let me tell you what I'm talking about here. Not much. What happened? I don't know what happened. Not much was or is known about the Galatia event. So there's a little bit of redundancy there too. Most information available during the outage stemmed from civilian media reporting on the collapse of various famous statues within the first 40 minutes before the UNGOC started responding to the event. So I thought that was really, really cool too. A nice way to sort of pack that in, just a little more about the statue's theme there too, the theme of the contest, I mean. So where were we? On to the next anomaly. So this is the third of the statue anomalies that we come through. It's called Hollow in the Wall, and it can spontaneously generate and remove mass, violating thermodynamics. So it's part of a gnarly sounding sapient statues unit, which I think is listed here somewhere. It escapes me now, but that's what it is, a sapient statues unit employed by the CI. So the description here is, again, very imaginative, as all of these statues really are, with the talented clinical tone boosting the vividness of this imagery. There are some gaps in the fluency of the sentence construction here. It is to be dragged or pulled on a wheeled bed, plate, wherever possible to compensate for its extremely slow movement. just a little difficult to get through. A typo here and there too, here and there. In the idle state, the cavity's only connection taut he surface of the concrete block is at the sole. So that obviously should be to the surface, whatever. So it's very cool to see this team of anomalous statues sort of weaponized and put into action in the field. The sequence of this is very clear. It's very easy to follow. Great action sequences going on here as well. Some also interesting interrogation is happening next. Here it is, Sapient Statues Unit Deployment Report. This is the nice action right here. So there's an interesting interrogation that goes on next here. This is the Gamer Against Weed character coming back, I think. And it offers some very interesting twists in the action in the article, again, weaving some past elements from the story back and making use of those things. There's likewise a vibrant interaction between the containment organizations themselves here, such as the Chaos Insurgency and the SCP Foundation. So I think it's just really, really cool. We don't often see that sort of, organization level interaction, cross interaction like that. So I thought this was really, really cool. And then this is a nice little touch at the very end of this little notice here. It says, Dr. Rivera, Engineering and Technical Service Department, office hours 10 to 1600. GMT +7, so think when you call, so that you're not calling this person at night, which I totally get. That sort of hits me right there in a lot of ways. On to the next addendum. This is some very disturbing and sort of nearby imagery to the statues regarding the previously discussed pregnant woman that sort of happens in an immaculate way. So just a very creative reach here and just really, really vivid, memorable imagery. The article ends with an academic entry, Introduction to Practical Self-Petrification, on the process of biological petrification. It's very, very well written and flexes sort of backstory and history muscles. We're left on a redaction at the very, very end here, right there. I don't think, honestly, this lands very well. Kind of a rough ending right here. The scattered nature of the article doesn't point towards this moment very definitively, in my opinion, just from my read and my understanding. And so it's somewhat of a dud at the end there to me, which is a bad place for a dud. But overall, this is a very, very interesting article, very detailed, incredibly imaginative, incredibly detailed and nuanced anomaly design with a well above average clinical tone. Just a lot, an absolute monster of creativity in the engine and the horsepower behind these ideas. I think the most impressive theme is sort of showing the integration of the contest's theme. The shortcomings of this article, I think, are its length. I think much of this is highly technical. Even some of the action sequences are sort of nested into more technical dialogue and terms. That sort of dulls the reception and read, in my opinion. I can only get so excited about those sections. And then, of course, because of its length, there were a little more typos and grammatical issues in this article for that reason than some of the other entries as well. But ultimately, really impressive article, one that doesn't quite leave the feeling of total cohesion with a lot of moving parts to fixate sort of a clear arc that's taken place over here. While the statues are recruited to deal with the original focus of the piece, which is the pareidolean man, it gets a little too complex, I think, and spends too much time in each anomaly for this to connect well by memory for the reader by the later portions of the article. So it feels like it's trying to juggle a little too much. There are some consolations, though, here, like just exemplary imagery, like I said, and the whole time I was just totally taken away by the naming of this. So this is another one, is the effigy kaleidoscope. It's just a great name. So excellent. The whole entry feels incredibly fast-paced, sort of like jungle beats per minute going on here. But it's also slightly attention deficited by the same token, like it's jerking and changing directions a little too frequently. The prose can get a little overdone, as in the communication log between the mortifier and the writer statue, and also in the discovery of the hollow in the wall statue, which was another very, very interestingly designed anomaly. So I can't say I get a lot of what goes on here. I wouldn't be able to tell you in an easy synopsized fashion what happens ultimately in this article, but I'm very, very impressed with it. It's It's like a compilation of very small sort of vignettes that definitely connect thematically, that I don't really get the ultimate push of, but I think is a pleasure to have read through. So I certainly appreciated this entry, and it was really honestly very impressed with the with this author, who I hadn't read a lot of before this. So this was nice to see. Going a little longer tonight, aren't we? This is how it works. This is how it works when we go over articles. Just two more. These are not going to take too long, but I definitely want to give them the attention that they deserve. So this one is by Almerduck, who, if you don't know who Almerduck is, I don't know where you've been. Almerduck is probably, I hate to say it like this because it sounds so flattering and bombastic, but Almerduck is probably the most successful writer outside of SCP. And if Almerduck decided to or wanted to, Almerduck could own SCP easily. Almerduck wins every contest they enter, essentially. Not this one, so I hope that wasn't too heavy of a hit. I think Almerduck is more stable than that. Certainly more secure in their writing. Excellent author. One of my favorites. I was very excited to see this individual submit something to the contest, and Almerduck is. Almerduck occupies that same sort of academic, literary seriousness and sort of expertise, in my opinion. The same with people like Tufto, Harry Blank, when Harry Blank is writing really, really well and not writing Neo Law Foundation. TM, you heard it first here, Neo Law Foundation. And people like Pepper's Ghost, other people like that. T. Rutherford, I think, is in that category too. Just people who you would select to put into a book for a literature class on containment fiction. I think Almerduck would be there. Some of the best and most sophisticated writing that I come across easily, and most of it's on RPC. Just FYI. All right, so enough of that. Let's get to the actual article itself. So we get to the containment protocols, very sophisticated. We get different arms of the tasks at hand and the phases of containment based on the current situation, which I think is very cool. So phase 1, phase 2, white, phase 3, green. These are all dependent upon certain conditions. And so I thought that was a nice sort of mosaic and moving picture of containment protocols. We don't really usually get something like that, so it's nice to see. I know this is a favorite term of this author, and so I was happy to see it here. Very cool. Oneronautics? Did I say that wrong? Really cool. I also love this red phase assets collapsible. Very well thought out. Very well. Very creative. Really detailed. Without being a little too heavy. I thought that was a nice touch as well. So we're getting through the containment. We're getting through the containment protocols here. That this is a contagion of sorts that can spread rapidly and potentially devastatingly, and that there are dreams involved here. Psychology, anti-memetics, and cryptology are also involved here as well, as the asset list says. I love the touches like the statement just before the description. All information past this point is deemed provisional. Just nice little touches. The description takes a very interesting posture, describing the anomaly in shorthand. Poorly defined sensorial contagion spreading throughout the American continent. Kind of reminds me of Dr. Gears' proposal kind of phraseology. So it takes this very interesting posture describing the anomaly in shorthand and almost sort of a stream of consciousness of phrases. I think it really, really works well here, as the first words of this section are poorly defined, as we read, indicating this whole thing is still kind of a work in progress for the authority. The clinical tone, though, is absolutely stellar. This one right here, it is roughly describable as a contagious, recurrent, oniric experience that is usually concrete and emotionally pervasive. Absolutely masterful clinical tone there, descriptive-wise, too. So nice to see that. I love the clinical conveyance of the dream's plot that follows next in the description. It gives a very mysterious and acrobatic momentum to the article itself. We're also introduced to the titular components, which is a house and a tower that are present in this pervasive dream. Then, just in case someone is wondering, though difficult to precise, it is roughly describable. Just in case anyone is wondering, that is technically correct. You technically can use the word precise as a verb, which the author does here. So I thought that was kind of cool. You don't see that every day either. My favorite thing about this so far in the read is how the article justifies itself as a less than formalized document. Very atypical, but very aware of itself as such. It's more than compensatory for that, I think. So let's actually take a look at what I'm talking about. So a compilation of relevant excerpts, artistic works, summaries, and other illustrative and official documents are attached below in lieu of a formalized file. Just, it's so fucking elegant, man. The God, dude, I mean, just like most people, how do I explain this? Most people don't even care to make eye contact with the fact that their article is maybe less than stellarly polished in a clinical tone fashion. This author is so far beyond that. They're so post that they're literally flying circles around someone like that. I mean, they're able to say this and then justify why it is that it's not as formalized as typically you would see effortlessly. It just rolls off the tongue so fluently. It's amazing to watch this happen. So excellent job. The addenda, which we get, I think, about 7 of them or so, are more free-form and prose portions of the article, a chance for the author to sort of flex, really, this sort of take the leash off of this non-clinical writing, which obviously typically is kind of a barrier, a kind of a challenge, and kind of a restraint in some ways. And they don't disappoint. So we'll go through these quickly. The first addendum is lavish with excellent imagery and phrasing. There's a few choice lines in here. A sting of adrenaline washes over and dries up before I see anything else happen. Like that one quite a lot. This is another one. Seeing that really puts into perspective just how wide the human vision is. It's almost dizzying when you don't have anything in particular to focus on. In fact, I could feel myself get almost nauseous before the pink blots started coalescing and shifting a little in color. So that's just, I love the attention to detail, the phenomenological attention to detail that this author is bringing with them into this article, which is heavily dream oriented. So here's another one. And I don't really pay attention to that because it just so happens that they don't have faces. Oh, sorry. What they're eating isn't clear. This is in the dream. What they're eating isn't clear. And I don't really pay attention to that because it just so happens that they don't have any faces. Just excellent delivery going on here. A couple more. A white sculpture / tower rises from a black cutoff of a suburban skyline covered in the faint pink light of a winter morning. There's really a lot of this. There's a line in here that says, panic starts to pool above the belly button. The alarm clock rips me out of the window and into the real world from the dream. Just, very, very thoughtful creativity here, and just excellent composition of sentences. Certainly a very impressive poetic touch to some of this. There's also a little shout out. I kind of want to call Almerduck out for this because I think this is what's going on, but I'm not sure. Is the inclusion of the word lamplight an allusion to somebody that we all know you like, that we like as well? Almerduck is, like I said, in that class of categories who's a writer's writer, right? Very much like Tufto. Back to addendum 1, there are moments of sort of overtaking the descriptive prose, overbaking it really. So for example, though not in the same way that the wrinkled adjective immediately evokes, I know how the author is thinking for this line, and they badly want to include it because it's very specific and very descript, but the sentence probably works better without that. We're sort of at the level of pedantic critique right now, where we are assailing the author's most minor of movements, but I think this is an easy decision for somebody who's a bit detached from the writing process in this article to see. As a phrase, it just doesn't really work right. Same with the immediately depreciatory comment on addendum 3, I think. This is fucking stupid. That's the author comes through a little bit too much right there. I can hear Almerduck saying that on Confic Call-In. on the audio there. But anyways, the author does employ some very useful, very innovative devices here, such as the in-universe author's commentary on each of these addenda, on each of these insertions here. The author pokes fun at themselves, despite the obvious dramaticism of this. What's up? Huh? Sorry, I couldn't understand what you're saying. So the author kind of pokes fun at their own compositional tendencies here, kind of in an endearing way, sort of euphemizing any errors in the excerpt into an in-universe absolution. So that's also very clever, but I see what you're doing there. The author is also making subtle moves paralleling the dream sequence to a contagion. So there's this line here I thought was very interesting parallel. It suggests, okay, so obviously getting an exact time for this switch is tough, but the testimony and estimates combined always land somewhere within the first 3 or 4 hours of sleep. It suggests something akin to an incubation period. Really, really cool touch there to make the parallel. It's refreshing to see the author also seems to have done some research about neurological stimuli as well. Not everybody is willing to do that, which is to say, do some homework in order to write, or maybe it's the case this was just pleasure reading that has been turned into a sort of form of homework. But either way, each of these distinct addenda, they have their own character, their own voice that changes up the tone and the idea as well. Addendum 3 is a great example where we get suddenly a very sort of evangelical sort of tone. Not a lot of people, I think, can do that well, so kudos to the author. In addenda 2, the direction the anomaly sort of takes here is kind of cool and intriguing. The contagion-like dream sequence finds emergent identity as an art form, and artists sort of produce in its name. So some convincing literary analysis here, actually, in the voice of this character. Really, really complex and talented literary analysis going on there. So I even love the jabs at the hyper phallicization of everything by modern day cultural theorists. Just some really great moments in there too. So I'm just going to geek out about some of these phrases, tie it all together in a nice symbolic package. Awesome. This paragraph here. Do you know how many drafts it took me to cut down this commentary to a reasonable size? About 6. Leaning on the fourth wall just a bit there. So it's nice to see. The next addendum is an exploration attempt courtesy of the Department of Aeronautics. Man, a harmony would kill me knowing that I can't pronounce that right. But it has some great moments of realization here that recontextualize the whole article. Funny also that this is the second entry that we see that makes use of this phenomena, the pareidolia, like we saw in the Chaos Insurgency article from Zesk, the pareidolean man. Some of this commentary also gets, I think, probably a bit too fourth wallish. I suppose the nondescript nature of the exploration attempt helps exemplify the general feeling of nothingness that takes over when trying to analyze anything regarding this anomaly. It's like the author sort of front running the critique of their own article in a way, and that's fine to do. But it just happens, I think, one too many times in this whole piece, to where it becomes a little obvious. I think the creative form of the next addendum, which is sort of pictograms of the tower, you can see it tall and overbearing. You can see the house sort of looking like a house here. That's kind of creative. I like that touch. Of course, it was presented in an artistic fashion. Once again, these are excerpts from other artists describing this phenomenon. So I think it was well situated, well housed, and well couched in the in-universe presentation of this document. It also sort of plays subtly in a bohemian fashion with some of the themes that were introduced in the previous addenda. I love the additions in the next section as well, which update us on more information and have such masterful turns of story and narrative as to send chills up the arms, particularly the last line, which says, though the nature of the object is presently undetermined due to the crude composition and technique behind the artwork, it is strongly believed that it is not a tower. So I don't know if you remember, but the very opening lines of the article, almost it was talking about the tower. It struck through the word sculpture and said tower instead, and so now we're back to where we were. It's kind of a little foreshadowing, just really cool to see. The last log I think here has a very nice crescendo underneath it of character, setting, and action. The interview is very elegantly conveyed to the reader as a vivid scene. It's as clear as a motion picture scene because of the way the author writes this. There's a little play with the logic here that finally imparts this dreamlike sensation, not to just the article, but to the reader now. It all kind of comes together at the end in like this terrible symphony, all the pieces finally being put together, and seeing they all had room intentionally left out of them so as to fit together kind of like a puzzle. So an excellent ending. So this is kind of all in all, I think, a very dreamy, a very weightless, a very forlorn article that plays with the familiar feelings of sleep and dream states. It captures those sensations in all of their almost indescribable atomic moments very, very well, and a very, very gripping talent of composition. There's all these elements in here of insertion that I feel we probably all have some familiarity with when it comes to dreams, like people not having faces, stuff like this. The article also struggles with sort of this gravitational abandonment to nihilism as the most sensible worldview. So that's nice to see play throughout here. Excellent clinical tone, superb prose writing. The pacing is spot on. It makes the read very gripping. There are very few spelling and grammar errors in this. I think there's just really one that I found in this whole. This is a decently long one. This one says, and obviously there's no tower where there should be. Thought a signal tower gave me the goosebumps when the bus attended. That should be though, not thought. It has an extra T on there. No big deal. That's really the only error that I found, which is remarkable. It's nice to see somebody put this much effort into the polish. So anyway, ultimately, this article gave me chills. It really gave me chills, and the ending sent those chills up my spine. Just a superb entry. I think this one also was quite underrated for the voting, but that obviously doesn't say everything. But just excellent job. Really, really good entry. Okay, so we are on our last entry. This is entry 4, and this is the winner. Very, very justly earned, in my opinion. Very well deserved. The title of this is Sword of Everyone's Hatred, and like I mentioned, this is Salt Blossom. This is a PDF, and it's in an indie format. So that's just a nice little touch to this winner for me in the contest, is that the winner was an indie. Not that I was rooting for any one particular format, but it was just kind of cool that the winner ended up being indie. So this one actually got its own post on the blog, and I don't know if Salt Blossom knows this, but typically on the magazine, when we post like actual containment fiction works, like writing, prose, tales, confic articles, whatever, those tend to get a lot less views than all the other ones. But in in about a week, 102 views is really, really, really good for an actual piece of containment fiction art. So, not that I'm a numbers guy, but I just want to make Salt Blossom feel as good as they deserve to feel, because this is a really, really, really good article. It is really good. I'm glad that I wasn't really truly voting. I would have a very, very hard time selecting which article I think should have won. And this one was right up there with any other one that I would have been giving that consideration for. So I love getting into the article here. I love the format work. The asset evaluation portion of the header is just particularly nice. The EWS, which stands for Environment Work and Suppression Protocols, is a novel way to do conprox, essentially. It's technical without being off-puttingly so, the whole section here, and introduces the classic lobotomy corpse style work classes system. Let's see if I have that. Ooh, maybe I don't. It's gone, and it's gone. Anyway, trust me, there's a little bit of Lobotomy Corporation in this. Taking notes from Lobotomy Corporation. Oh, here it is. Only abuse, artistic, and cleanliness type works are permitted. So, Salty, you kind of, peeking the hand a little away from the chest there, right? Kind of people across the table can see your head. Lobotomy Corporation. Come on, who else could it be? But we gleaned some very interesting qualities from this anomaly, such as the need for oral transmission of data. And I always love to relish in a well-named action team. This one is Neuromancers. There's a couple other ones too. I think Paper Bishops is another one that shows up here that I thought was really good. Onto the description. This is really just an excellent use of the contest theme. I think probably the best use of the contest theme, honestly. It's hard to make the statue, like an actual statue anomaly, the anomaly, and make it be really, really novel and exciting. We've seen a couple other entries that do this because they sort of don't really elevate to the point of being gripping. I think this article does that really well. It's very difficult to take something so superficial as making the theme blatantly and verbatimly your anomaly and it be really, really good. This author does that very well. The imagery here in this anomaly is so striking. It's deeply appealing. Let me just read this. The anomaly is a statue of a humanoid figure pinned to the ground via a broadsword inserted into its back. The figure rests face down with his arms outstretched in front and its hands curled inwards. The broadsword possesses a rhombus-shaped hilt with hexagonal sword guard. An unknown, non-anomalous script is inscribed on the sword's hilt. So that image is so powerful. It just makes me want to read the rest of the article really well. So the next movement in this is a compulsion effect, which again is hard to make compelling, but it is done really, really well here too. The compulsion is very complex and baffling. Like, for example, subjects ranting regarding the statue's apparent flaws. To the point that you don't really care about the use of the compulsion as a cliche. It casually drops informational crumbs to keep this section moving at an exciting and kinetic pace, such as this moment right here where it says, the operator tried to pierce the anomaly with a laser cutter. They only succeeded in discovering the inner core instead. So it's like, oh, okay, yeah, just casually mention that, why don't you? The inner core, excellent. So it's interesting to see how pervasive dreaming ended up being in this contest. We have a lot of entries that dealt with dreaming. Something about statues and dreams. I don't know. Interesting. The invasive aspects for sapient entities finds a whole lot of fertile analogy with daily life and brings to mind the nature of people addicted to social media and this compulsion effect of them getting sort of dependent upon it and angry at it at the same time. Sort of a parapsychology in so many ways. The anomaly itself could be very well a thin metaphor for something like Twitter, which incidentally the author actually ends up endorsing in some ways in the commentary, which if you haven't read the commentary, it's at the very bottom in the comment section. You just keep scrolling down, and here it is. Salt Blossom did some excellent commentary, behind the scenes kind of stuff for this article. So if you haven't checked that out, do that. Really cool. We have an informational hazard. It's sort of reintroduced and highlights the social aspects of these media contagions that we live with daily. Another innovation here is adding an environment description to the format, which mixes the anomaly description and the containment terms, and it sort of gives the anomaly a more performative note. And I love the addition of feng shui to introduce some potentially sapient undertones to this statue in all of its mystery and sort of concealed nature. The creativity in expanding the anomaly is excellent. We feel an intense need to understand what the hell this thing is doing here and why we can't see the human that's a part of this, no matter what angle we take or no matter how we try. There's another section in the description where if people try to remove this thing from the ground so that they can get a view of who the person is with their face down, the anomaly can't be lifted up. It's very frustratingly, parsimonious, I guess, when it comes to the information that it's willing to give people. So just really, really, it gets more interesting the more the author adds to it, which is not easily done either. Just FYI. There's a discovery section here that I think is serviceable. It skillfully casts the anomaly's mechanisms and introduced more well-named teams like I said, Night Livers, Paper Bishops. I think is pretty cool. Next, we get an interview transcript that comes about the task at a very creative angle here. So it doesn't really feature a named organizational counterpart to the interviewee, which is almost always the case in containment fiction. You always almost have the role of an interviewer, who's listed in here. But instead, that here is sort of simplified. It's truncated and factored out of the equation in a very clever manner. So the role of the interviewer is abstracted by simple directive text that we see here in brackets, just sort of action brackets here. So, which is pretty cool. The interviewee character's speech is believable, well acted out by the author, balancing the emotions well and guiding the reader through without collisions with overdone mood or shallow characterization. We don't get any of that in this. The character is sympathetic with the right amount of backstory. For example, a shitty and absent father who frittered life away in front of immersive sim games, I guess like Second Life or something like that. We get some insight into the philosophical elements at play behind why someone would just get so mad at a sculpture. Let's see if we can find this sentence that this interviewer says. Just because something is original doesn't mean it's automatically good. Right. The first human who took a dump still did a dump at the end, and the end result was still brown and smelly. So the author finds very subtle ways to inject a feeling of error into this character who is clearly suffering from the compulsion effect, and it's just very nicely guided. Again, I love the inclusion of an asset evaluation section, which comes back here again, and I admire the care that's put into the proceedings. For example, the organization is only ready to approach the possibility of this being an asset after they've done sufficient research, which we've seen before, to ensure things like safety and proper allocation of resources. So the logic of this potential utility is well stated too. It's just very, very smart section of the piece. Next is an exploration log that walks us through the dreamscape that's inspired by the entity. More great imagery here with escalating emotions of otherworldly unfamiliarity and obfuscated sight. Some very nice eldritch sort of being possessed and sort of being like body horror kind of notes at the end of this as well, in this last section here. The last addendum of this article deciphers some of the unknown language that we've been introduced to at numerous places. Once again, that has ramped up the mystery and the intrigue and sort of the creepiness factor of this piece. The deciphered text speaks, you can see it here sort of contrasted in a dark table, but it sort of speaks to the perversion of something beautiful, of a higher intelligence sort of chastising humanity for some unspoken sin that is defined more by gluttony than from humanity's relative ignorance in comparison with this higher intelligence. And then the last line of this sort of cranks up the time pressure and gives an impending sense of doom. If not already, it should arrive very, very soon. So the article cleverly ends on leaning on its own cliches. For example, such as the exact translation tools showing up in the exact right time, and that sort of solving the issue in some ways here. The author sort of judos this and sort of absolves that potential cliche into the greater intelligence and the implications of the higher intelligence of this whole behind this whole anomaly. So the best part of this article for me is its conceptual creativity, its tact and handling some very volatile ingredients, its pacing, which is unrelenting and totally gripping the whole way through. I don't feel like there's one word in this article that doesn't need to be in here. There's no meandering. There's no frivolousness. It's a very effective laser-like work that leaves very vivid images and emotions, ones that I again think are expertly calibrated to resonate with most readers, even if they aren't sure as to why, which is just the best kind of connection, particularly for this sort of ephemeral, this sort of ethereal category of writing that we're in containment fiction. So I think this is a real achievement of a work for a variety of reasons. First, it's most superficially, it's the highest paid author and the most revenue generating work of containment fiction, I think, because this won the prize money. But more importantly than that, it's a severe achievement for the author. This is the author's first work of containment fiction, as described in the commentary. It's just amazing that somebody was able to do this, write this well at this level, essentially their first time. It's not, and win a contest with some pretty stout competition here, honestly. Really, really amazing. And third, probably most importantly, actually, of all, in some ways, with all congratulations to Salt Blossom, this is a very clear indication to me, and really the reason why the INDIECON was a success is that it's very clear by this article that containment fiction doesn't have any bounds when it comes to party, platform, or person. This is in the category of our weekly review show for SCP. If I was categorizing this, it would easily be in the weightlifting category, which is the best category you can be in on the SCP Wiki. This is for anybody who thinks that SCP has a monopoly on quality writing and talent in this space. I got news for you. Okay, and I think this contest, conveyed that very convincingly, and certainly this winning article, which was kind of mind-blowing to read. Once again, I was very excited to see Salt Blossom enter, because I knew that Salt Blossom hadn't really written any containment fiction before, and I expected it to be good. I was blown away when I read this article, so I certainly hope that you will read it. Again, it's called Sword of Everyone's Hatred. It won INDIECON 2022, so congratulations to this entry. Like I said, very, very well deserved. All right, so like I said, we've been going longer tonight. It's about 2 hours. More than happy to get through those articles. Very happy. They all deserve the attention that we gave them and more. So go check them out if you haven't. Will not be the last contest that we do for Confic Magazine. We'll probably have prize money again. I think that's kind of a cool little feature. We'll definitely keep the blinded presentation so that you don't know who you're voting for until the end, until you've already done it. And I'm just excited about the possibilities of the future. But for now, it's 7K at the SCP, obviously. It's a 7K season for that. So Friday we'll be going over, I guess, all of them. I've got a few people helping me out, which is great. And I think we'll get through, a lot of them. I don't know if we'll get through them all, I guess, but we'll try it out. So join us on Friday night for that. Obviously, we don't do this on Thursday nights anymore. Sorry, just how it is. Got to take care of myself and my things. So, but I appreciate you joining us tonight. Thanks for sticking through this for 2 hours. You got quite the endurance, and I appreciate that. I'm gonna go clean up this water that I spilled like 20 minutes ago on my desk, and I hope you have a great night. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you once again to all the people who entered into INDIECON 2022. I had a great time. Very happy, very proud. All right, this has been SCPCRNP, aka Lack of Lepers. Have a great night. Thank you again.